Hello everybody, and today I'll be looking at the custom set that I made, Glittering Skies. So starting off is Surskit with 60 HP and the Pond Gliding ability, where if it has no energy attached, it has no retreat cost, and then one colorless Ram for 10. The Masquerain that it evolves into has 110 HP, and the Distracting Pattern ability, where once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may have your opponent discard a card from their hand. So this offers some more control strategies for grass, and can be very disruptive, especially if your opponent has a lower hand size. And then Wind Shard for grass and a colorless does 50 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon. And then Pheromosa with 110 HP and the Rapid Movements ability, where this Pokemon can use its attacks even if it's the first turn of the game. And then Twin Souls for Grass does 20 to the active and then 20 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So Foremantis with 70 HP slash for 20, and then Lurantis with 120 HP and the Regrow ability. Once during your turn, you may attach a basic Grass Energy card from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. And then Dual Sickles for a Grass and a Colorless does 70 damage for each Grass Energy you discard from the Lurantis. The Kartana has 70 HP and the Enhanced Blade attack. For a Grass, it does 10 damage, and then if it has any tool cards attached to it, it does 40 more damage. And then Vengeful Cleave for a Grass and two colorless does 120 damage. But if any of your Pokemon were knocked out by damage from an attack during your opponent's last turn, the attack can be used for just a single Grass. Carablast has 60 HP, 1 Grass, Tackle does 20, Escavalier has 90 HP and the Javelin Assault ability. Once during your turn, when this Pokemon moves from your bench to the active spot, you put 3 damage counters on your opponent's active Pokemon. And then Pierce Through for a Grass and a Colorless does 70 damage and 20 damage to 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon. This opens up some cool spread options for Grass. The Escavalier itself can do 100 damage with its attack combined with its ability, and then the 20 snipes on 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon, plus the Sunny Day abilities from Lilligant and Lurantis can push those numbers up more. Muscle Band can bump it up even more, so you can do some crazy spread plays. And then Tapu Bulu has 130 HP, the Grassy Surge ability. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you can search your deck for up to 2 basic Grass Energy and discard them, and then you shuffle your deck. And then Nature's Madness for a Grass does 10, and then 20 more for each Grass Energy in your discard pile. So Sprigatito, 70 HP, Synthesis for a Grass, you search your deck for a Grass Energy and attach it to one of your Pokemon, then shuffle your deck, and then for a Grass and a colorless, Scratch does 30 damage. Floragato has 90 HP, 1 Grass Slash for 30, and then for a Grass and a colorless, Seed Bomb, you choose one of your opponent's Pokemon 3 times, you can choose the same Pokemon more than once, and then for each time you choose a Pokemon, do 20 damage to it, and the damage isn't affected by weakness or resistance. And then Meowscarada has 150 HP and the Flower Trick ability. Once during your turn, you can put 2 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. And then Power for Grass and 2 colorless does 80 damage. And then if your opponent's active Pokemon is a basic Pokemon, it does 80 more damage. So Meowscarada is a pretty powerful stage 2. You get to spread more damage. And then Power Whip can be very good at taking out your opponent's basic attackers. Next up is Charcadet with 70 HP and the Fire Blast attack. For 1 fire, you do 10 damage, and then you can discard a basic fire energy from your hand. If you do, the attack does 30 more damage, and it evolves into Armarouge with 130 HP and the Reactive Armor ability. This is one of my favorite cards that I've made in this set. I think it's a really cool idea. Once during your opponent's turn, when they play a card from their hand to evolve one of their Pokemon, you can draw 2 cards. You can't use more than 1 reactive armor ability each turn. So I think this is super cool because in Pokemon we don't really have anything that lets us do stuff on our opponent's turn, like react to stuff that they do, and I think this is a cool way to allow that, and Fire could really use the draw, let's be honest. And then Flare Shot for 2 fire and a colorless does 120. Blacephalon has 110 HP in the Fiery Burst. If this Pokemon is in the active spot and is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, you move 2 fire energy from this Pokemon to one of your bench Pokemon. And then Pyrotechnics does 20 damage for 1 fire, and then before doing damage, you can attach a basic fire energy from your hand to this Pokemon. If you attach any energy in this way, it does 60 more damage. So you can get 80 damage for 1 energy, and then you preserve both of those energy by passing it back to one of your bench fire Pokemon. Next up is Cyndaquil with 50 HP and the Heating Up ability. Once during your turn, you can search your deck for a fire energy and attach it to the Cyndaquil. And then if you attach any energy in this way, you put 2 damage counters on the Cyndaquil, and then you shuffle your deck. Reprisal for a fire and a colorless does 20 damage for each damage counter on the Cyndaquil. So the Cyndaquil can potentially hit hard early, and then it is energy acceleration for the later evolutions. The Quilava has 90 HP, and the Smokescreen attack for a fire does 20 damage, and then if the defending Pokemon tries to attack during your opponent's next turn, your opponent flips a coin. If tails, that attack doesn't happen. And then the second attack is Fire Colorless Flare Up, does 60 plus, and then if this Pokemon has any damage counters on it, does 40 more damage. So if you go Heating Up with the Cyndaquil next turn evolve into Quilava, you can use Flare Up for 100 damage. Or you could go into Typhlosion with 170 HP and the Afterburner ability. Once during your turn, you may attach a basic Fire Energy card from your discard pile to one of your Fire Pokemon. If you attach any energy in this way, you put 1 damage counter on that Pokemon. And then the Explosive Inferno attack for a fire and a colorless does 50 damage for each of your Pokemon that has any damage counters on it. So you can kind of spread some energy around with Afterburner, and every time you do, you add an extra damage counter, and that's 50 more damage for Typhlosion. And this also pairs quite nicely with Magma Basin, which you can attach a basic fire energy from your discard pile to one of your bench fire Pokemon, and then you put 2 damage counters on that Pokemon, so you can potentially get up to like 150 damage in one turn with Typhlosion. Next up is Snorunt with 60 HP in the Call for Family. For colorless, you search your deck for a basic Pokemon, put it onto your bench, and then for 1 water, you tackle for 10. Frostless has 100 HP and the Snow Cloak ability. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you may put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon, and then if you place any damage counters in this way, you discard this Pokemon and all cards attached to it. So some cool spread plays. It has 100 HP, so you can't just rescue Carrier to get both the Snorunt and the Frostless back, and it does have to be in the active, but 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon can be pretty crazy. And then Wash Rotom, 80 HP, and the Hydraulic Cycling ability. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is on your bench, you may discard this Pokemon and all attached cards, and then if you do, draw a card. And then Aqua Burst for a Water Energy does 10 plus, and then this attack does 20 more damage for each Water Energy attached to the Rotom. So next up is Aracuda with 60 HP, and the Flip Turn attack for 1 water, you does 10 damage, and you switch it with one of your bench Pokemon. And then Barraskewda has 130 HP and the Propeller Tail ability. Once during your turn, you may attach a basic Water Energy card from your discard pile to this Pokemon. And then a Hydro Pump for 3 colorless does 10 plus 30 for each Water Energy attached to it. This goes well into the Quagsire Frostmoth engine because it gives you another way to recycle energy and keep energy in play. And then it has the Hydro Pump attack, so it's just a solid attacker. And then Castform Snowy Form with 70 HP and the 1 water Vengeful Hailstorm attack. You can only use the attack if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, and the attack does 30 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon. So next up is Staryu with the 60 HP and 1 water Mysterious Beam for 10. You flip a coin if heads, discard an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. And then Starmie with 90 HP, Water Gun, 1 water for 30, and then for a water and a colorless, Special Spin does 70 plus, and if it has any special energy attached, it does 70 more damage. Next up is Tapu Fini with 110 HP and the Rising Tide ability, where when you play it from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you can put an energy card from your discard pile into your hand. And then Misty Storm for a water and a colorless does 30 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon for each energy attached to the Tapu Fini. Next up is Pikachu with 70 HP, the Lightning Bolt attack for 1 lightning. It does 30 damage and you discard a lightning energy from this Pokemon. And then Electro Ball does 50 damage for 2 lightning and a colorless. Raichu has 110 HP and the Voltage Outlet ability. Once during your turn, you can discard a lightning energy from your hand, and if you do, you draw 3 cards. I think this is a good upgrade to Lightning. The only real draw is Zebstrika, and that's really, really destructive. It does help getting lightning energy in the discard pile for Dynamotor, and this is just another way to do that. And then Thunderbolt does 80 damage for a lightning and a colorless. Xurkitree has 110 HP. The Shock Bolt attack, 1 lightning does 20. And then Power Surge for 2 lightning and a colorless does 10 damage to each of your opponent's Pokemon for each prize card your opponent has taken. The Power Surge attack at the end of the game can be hitting for the same numbers that the Electivire with the Voltage Current can hit. So I think it's just a pretty solid attacker to have later in the game. Next up is Tadbulb with 60 HP and the Static Charge. For one lightning during your opponent's next turn. If this Pokemon is damaged by an attack, even if it's knocked out, the attacking Pokemon is now paralyzed. And then Belly Bolt has 130 HP and the Electromorphosis ability, where if this Pokemon is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, even if it's knocked out, you can search your deck for up to 3 basic Lightning Energy cards and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like. Then you shuffle your deck. So, huge energy acceleration, especially if your opponent hits into it. And it has the Thunder attack for 2 Lightning and a Colorless. It does 150 damage, and you discard an energy from it. So 150, it's hitting pretty solid numbers, so your opponent might have to deal with it, and otherwise they're going to have to waste their resources gusting around it. And it can take KOs with the Thunder attack. Next up is Tapu Koko with 110 HP and the Electric Surge ability. Once during your turn, when this Pokemon moves from your bench to the active spot, you may attach a basic Lightning Energy card from your discard pile to it, and then Bolt Cyclone for 2 Lightning and a Colorless does 100 damage, and you move an energy from this Pokemon to one of your bench Pokemon. So it gets energy into play, and then it can keep it in play with the Bolt Cyclone. Next up is Oricorio with 70 HP and the Ethereal Dance ability. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in your hand, you can reveal it. If you do, draw a card and put this Pokemon into the Lost Zone, and then Flap for 1 Psychic does 30 damage. I really like Lost Zone Psychic, and I kind of just wanted to give it a buff without making it too overpowered. Tapu Lele has 110 HP with the Wonder Call. Once during your first turn, you can search your deck for a basic Pokemon with 70 HP or less, reveal it, and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. And then Energy Drive for 2 Colorless, it does 20 damage for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. Dawnwing's Necrozma has 110 HP. Moongeist Flash for a Psychic does 10 damage, plus 50 if it moves from the bench to the active spot this turn. And then for 2 Psychic and a Colorless, Eclipse Beam does 120 damage. And if your opponent's Pokemon is knocked out by damage from this attack, you draw a card. Next up is Ghastly with 40 HP in the Spinning Fumes attack. Put 1 damage counter on each of your opponent's Pokemon. Haunter has 80 HP and the Haunting Spirit ability, where once during your turn, if any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn, you can put it onto your bench, and Sleep Pulse for a Psychic and a Colorless does 40 damage, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep. And then Gengar with 120 HP and the Hold a Grudge ability, where once during your turn, if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent, you can search your deck for a card and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. And Hypnoblast for a Psychic and a Colorless does 70 damage, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep. Next up is Marshadow with 80 HP and the Covered in Shadow ability, where if any damage is done to this Pokemon by attacks, you flip a coin if heads prevent that damage. And then Charged Knuckles for a Fighting and a Colorless does 40 damage, and if it has any special energy cards attached to it, it does 60 more damage. Buzzwole with 120 HP and the Juice Up ability, where you can use this ability only if this Pokemon has any damage counters on it. Once during your turn, you can draw 2 cards, and you can't use more than 1 Juice Up ability each turn. And then Crashing Impact for 2 Fighting and a Colorless does 140 damage, and during your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. And then Minior with 70 HP and the Cosmic Entry ability. Once during your turn, when this Pokemon moves from your bench to the active spot, you can draw a card. And then Rapid Spin for a Fighting and a Colorless does 30 damage, and you switch it with one of your bench Pokemon. Next up is Mienfoo with 60 HP and the Rapid Jab attack. You flip 4 coins, and it does 10 damage for each heads. And then Mienshao has 110 HP, the Rapid Combo ability, where this Pokemon can use an attack it has twice. If the first attack knocks out your opponent's active Pokemon, you may attack again after your opponent chooses a new active Pokemon. And then for 1 fighting, Gale Whips does 30 damage to the active and 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon. And then Tyrogue has 30 HP and the Defiant Punch. It does 20 damage for free, and then if your opponent's active Pokemon is an evolution in Pokemon, you discard an energy from it. Next up is Poochyena with 70 HP and the Call for Family attack. 1 Colorless, search your deck for a basic Pokemon, put it on your bench. And then Bite for Darkness and a Colorless does 30. Mightyena has 110 HP and the Pact Instincts ability. Once during your turn, you can draw cards until you have as many cards in your hand as you have Dark Pokemon in play. And then Crunch for Darkness and a Colorless does 70 damage. You flip a coin if heads, discard an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. And then Nihiligo with 110 HP, the Parasitic Tentacles attack for a Dark and a Colorless. You can only use this attack if your opponent's active Pokemon is poisoned, and you choose one of your opponent's active Pokemon's attacks and use it as this attack. Next up is Zubat with 50 HP in the Rapid Draw for 1 Colorless. If you go first, you can use this attack during your first turn, draw 2 cards, and then Bite 1 Darkness for 20. Golbat has 80 HP in the Dive Bomb ability. Once during your turn, you may put one damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon, and then Poison Fang for a Darkness and a Colorless does 50 damage, and your opponent's active Pokemon is now poisoned. Finally, Crobat has 130 HP, and the Echoing Veil attack for a Darkness and a Colorless, it does 80 damage. And then after doing damage, if you have 8 or more cards in your hand, you prevent all effects of your opponent's attacks, including damage, done to this Pokemon until the end of your opponent's next turn. So if you can maintain a hand size of 8 or more, then your opponent basically can't touch the Crobat. Next up is Stakataka with 140 HP and the Strange Alloy ability. This Pokemon takes 20 less damage for each prize card your opponent has taken. And then Metal Bashing for a metal and 2 colorless does 120 damage, and you discard an energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. Zacian has 110 HP, and the Crown Sword ability. Once during a turn, if this Pokemon is in your active spot, you can attach a metal energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon, and then Behemoth Blade for 2 metal and a colorless does 150 damage, and you discard 2 energy from the Pokemon. And then Duskmane Necrozma has 120 HP, and the Sunsteel Turbo attack. For a metal, you search your deck for a metal energy, attach it to one of your Pokemon. If you go second and it's your first turn, instead search your deck for 3 metal energy cards and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like. Then you shuffle your deck. And then Eclipse Impact for 2 metal and a colorless does 150, and during your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. Next up is Magnemite with 60 HP in the Gather Metal attack. For 1 metal, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck and attach any number of basic metal energy cards you find there to your Pokemon in any way you like, and then you shuffle all the other cards back into your deck. And then Magneton with 100 HP has the Stabilizing Magnets ability. Once during your turn, if any of your Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn, you may draw 2 cards, and you can't use more than 1 Stabilizing Magnets ability each turn. And then Zap Cannon for 2 metal and a colorless does 70 damage, and the Pokemon can't use Zap Cannon during your opponent's next turn. Magnezone has 160 HP, and the Gyro Ball attack for a metal and a colorless, it does 250 damage, but 50 less damage for each colorless in your opponent's active Pokemon's retreat cost. And then Steel Beam for 2 metal and a colorless does 180 damage and 30 damage to itself. Poipole with 70 HP has the Poison Toss attack. For a Psychic, it does 10 damage, and your opponent's active Pokemon is not poisoned. And then for a Lightning and a colorless, Tackle does 50 damage. Next up is Naganadel with 120 HP and the Energized Roar ability. Once during a turn, when you attach a energy card from your hand to this Pokemon, you can draw 2 cards. And then if you attach a special energy, you draw 1 additional card. And then Power Cyclone for 120 and 3 colorless. You move an energy from this Pokemon to one of your bench Pokemon. Finally, Guzzlord has 150 HP and the Violent Consumption ability. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you can discard the top card of your deck and then attach a basic energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon. And then Tyrannical Roar does 50 damage for a Psychic, a Darkness, and 2 colorless. And you can discard any number of basic energy from your Pokemon, and it does 50 damage for each card discarded in this way. The Applin has 30 HP and the Protective Aroma ability, where as long as this Pokemon is on your bench, you prevent all damage and effects of attacks from your opponent's Pokemon done to this Pokemon. And then a Grass and a Colorless roll does 20 damage. Diplin has 70 HP and the Exotic Syrup attack. For a Grass and a Fire does 30 damage plus, and then you can reveal up to 3 energy cards from your hand, and it does 30 more damage for each card revealed in this way. And then Hydrapple has 150 HP. Hydro Barrage for a Grass and a Fire. You reveal up to 5 energy cards from your hand. For each energy card revealed in this way, choose one of your opponent's Pokemon, and this attack does 40 damage to that Pokemon. This damage isn't affected by weakness or resistance, and then you shuffle the revealed cards back into your deck. Next up is Igglybuff with 30 HP and the free Lullaby attack. Your opponent's active Pokemon is now asleep, and during Pokemon Checkup, you flip 2 coins instead of 1. If either of them is tails, that Pokemon is still asleep. And then Munchlax had 30 HP and the free Collect Snacks attack. Search your deck for up to 2 cards and put them into your hand, then you shuffle your deck. Finally, Celesteela has 140 HP and the Reverse Thrusters ability, where once during a turn, if this Pokemon is in the active spot, you can switch it with one of your bench Pokemon. And then for 3 colorless, Giga Impact does 140 damage, and during your next turn, this Pokemon can't attack. Slackoth has 70 HP and the Big Yawn attack. For 2 colorless, both active Pokemon are now asleep. And then Vigoroth has 90 HP and the Wake Up Punch attack. For 1 colorless, it does 20 damage. And then if this Pokemon evolved from Slackoth during this turn and Slackoth was asleep, this attack does 100 more damage. and then Slash for 3 colorless to 70 damage. Finally, Slaking has 170 HP and the Indifferent ability, where you prevent all damage from attacks done to this Pokemon by your opponent's basic Pokemon. And then Lazy Punch for 3 colorless does 140 damage, and this attack's damage isn't affected by any effects on your opponent's active Pokemon. So into the trainers, there's Explorer's Satchel, where you search your deck for an Evolution Grass Pokemon or a Pokemon Tool card, reveal it and put it into your hand, then you shuffle your deck. Flare Whistle, you can only play if any of your fire Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn, and you put a supporter card from your discard pile into your hand. And then Energy Net, you look at the top 6 cards of your deck and attach a basic water energy you find there to one of your benched water Pokemon, and you shuffle the other cards back into your deck. Electromagnetic Radar, you look at the top 7 cards of your deck. You can reveal up to 2 in any combination of Lightning Pokemon and Lightning Energy you find there and put them into your hand, and then you shuffle the other cards back into your deck. Miracle Charm, you put 2 in any combination of Basic Psychic Pokemon and Basic Psychic Energy cards from your discard pile into your hand. And then Black Belt's Notes, you shuffle a Fighting Pokemon and a Basic Fighting Energy from your discard pile back into your deck. And then if any of your Fighting Pokemon were knocked out during your opponent's last turn, you put those cards into your hand instead. Ancient Relic, when you play this card, you can discard up to 2 other cards from your hand. You must discard at least 1, and then for each card discarded, search your deck for a Darkness Pokemon, reveal it, and put it in your hand, then you shuffle your deck. Mechanics Toolkit, you search your deck for a basic Metal Energy and a Pokemon Tool card, reveal them, and put them into your hand. And then Energizing Perfume, you attach a basic energy from your hand to one of your basic colorless Pokemon. Ruinic Slate, you can play this card only if you discard another card from your hand, and you search your deck for a special energy card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Next is Rotom Phone. You reveal a supporter card from your hand and put it into your deck. If you do, you search your deck for a supporter, reveal it, and put it into your hand. And then Ultra Space Reactor, you choose one. You put a supporter card with Lusamine in the name from your discard pile into your hand, or you attach a basic energy from your hand to one of your Ultra Beasts. Next up is Lusamine's Prowess. For each prize card your opponent has taken, attach a basic energy from your discard pile to your Ultra Beasts in any way you like. Colress's Method, you put any number of cards from your hand on top of your deck, and then you draw that many cards from the bottom of your deck. And then Professor Juniper's Study, you search your deck for up to 2 in any combination of basic Pokemon and basic energy cards, reveal them, and put them into your hand. So the stadiums, I kind of finished out the cycle of Stormy Mountains and Brooklet Hill, where they were like type-specific artisans. So Enchanted Fields gets you a basic grass or psychic Pokemon. Endless Void gets you a basic darkness or colorless Pokemon, and then Great Forge gets you a basic fire or metal Pokemon and just puts them straight onto your bench. Into the special energy, there's Enticing Grass Energy, where as long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides grass energy. When you attach this card from your hand to one of your grass Pokemon, you search your deck for a basic Pokemon and put it onto your bench, and then shuffle your deck. Scorching Fire Energy, as long as it's attached to a Pokemon, it provides fire. And then when you attach this card to one of your fire Pokemon, you may make your opponent's active Pokemon burned. Tidal Water Energy, as long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides water energy. And then when you attach this card from your hand to one of your benched water Pokemon, you switch that Pokemon with your active Pokemon. Next up is Voltage Lightning Energy, where as long as it's attached to a Pokemon, it provides lightning energy. And then if the lightning Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot and is knocked out by damage from an attack of your opponent's Pokemon, you move this card to one of your benched lightning Pokemon. Oracle Psychic Energy, as long as it's attached to a Pokemon, provides Psychic Energy. And then when you attach this card from your hand to one of your Psychic Pokemon, you look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put them back in any order. And then Defiant Fighting Energy, as long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides Fighting Energy. And then if the Fighting Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from an opponent's attack, you put that Pokemon into your hand, discarding all cards attached to it. And then Shady Darkness Energy, as long as this card is attached to a Pokemon, it provides Darkness Energy. If the Darkness Pokemon this card is attached to is in the active spot and is damaged by an attack, even if it's knocked out, your opponent discards a card from their hand. And then Refined Metal Energy, as long as it's attached to a Pokemon, it provides Metal Energy. And if the Metal Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from an attack from your opponent's Pokemon, you draw cards until you have 7 in your hand. And then Immunity Colorless Energy, as long as it's attached to a Pokemon. Immunity Colorless Energy, where as long as it's attached to a Pokemon, it provides colorless. And then the colorless Pokemon this card is attached to recovers from all special conditions and can't be affected by any special conditions. So thanks for watching. I'll leave a couple links in the description below. used PokeCard Maker to make all these cards. It's a really good resource to make cards. I really like the website. And then Limitless TCG is where I got all the card scans from. Thanks for watching. Leave your thoughts on the cards below. What was your favorite? If you thought any were broken. I do have some ideas for a new set, so let me know if you were interested. Thanks. Have a good day.